Good evening. As I do not speak any regional languages, I will just hold up this. So please, if you have a mobile phone or a cell phone, would you either turn it off or put it on silent mode for the duration of this evening's session, as a gesture of respect to the speaker and everybody else present. So a warm welcome to this public lecture during the 143rd International Convention of the Theosophical Society, whose theme is Truth and Beauty, a Field Beyond. I was delighted when I became aware of this theme because I think beauty in particular has not been given as much attention as it might in the Theosophical Society. Now, for anybody who is here perhaps for the first time or does not know very much about the Theosophical Society, a few words are in order. We have branches in around 70 countries around the world. The Society was formed in 1875, and for almost all of the time since then, the international headquarters has been here in Adyar, in what was formerly Madras and is now Chennai. The principal object of the Society is basically to help foster unity, the unity of humanity without any distinctions at all. The Society was formed primarily to make known to the world theosophy or divine wisdom. Our objects include, among other things, an inquiry into religion, philosophy and science, and discovering our latent potentialities as human beings, which really implies the possibility of spiritual transformation. All presentations from platforms of the Theosophical Society, most importantly, are offered in the spirit of freedom of thought. It's a great pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, the Society's International President, Mr. Tim Boyd. He has been serving in this office since April of 2014. Tim was born in New York City and lived there for 17 years until he left to attend Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. From there, he transferred to the University of Chicago, where he was an honors graduate with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Public Affairs. He joined the Theosophical Society in America in 1974. Together with Bill Lawrence, a TS member and mentor, and others, he founded a theosophical spiritual community in Chicago's inner city. This group held classes on the ageless wisdom, meditation, and healing. They worked with at-risk and disadvantaged youth, transformed vacant lots into award-winning organic food gardens. It sounds like a fantastic project, and placed beehives on the roofs of local buildings. The group formed a business that initially focused on reclaiming and renovating deteriorating residential buildings in their area, creating housing for low and middle-income families. Their work helped stabilise neighbourhoods through the training and employment of local youth and the creation of affordable homes for area residents. In 1988, Tim became a national lecturer for the TS in America. From 1996 until 2000, he worked in hospice services as a volunteer in a team that involved doctors, social workers, and nurses. In 2007, he became President of the Theosophical Order of Service, or TOS, in the USA, and in 2011 was elected the President of the Theosophical Society in America. Tim's involvement with the Theosophical Order of Service and the Kushul Orphanage in Tibet led to an audience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, which resulted in the TS in America sponsoring his visit to Chicago in July of 2011, a two-day event attended by 10,000 people. This event raised $400,000, all of which was donated to educational projects aiding Tibetan communities worldwide. And now we move more close to the present. In 2014, Tim Boyd was re-elected as the TS in America president for 3 years until 2017, but also elected that year as president of the Theosophical Society, the international president of this society. He shares his time between the headquarters of the TS here in Adyar, Chennai, and also travelling as the international president of the society in different continents, and his home in Chicago, USA, where he lives with his wife Lily and daughter Angelique. It is a very great pleasure for me to therefore introduce our most respected international Tim Boyd, who's going to speak to us this evening on A Path to Beauty.
Well, thank you, Linda, for the introduction. For me, hearing myself being described is always a rather interesting affair. The many things that are said and the many things that are left unsaid. I do know that during the course of this evening's introduction, it allowed me to go back down memory lane for a moment, particularly to the event that we hosted with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, but not the event so much as we raised a lot of money that we had said from the very beginning that every penny that was raised would go toward projects selected by His Holiness within the Tibetan community. And so it worked out to about $400,000 US. A day came when that money had to be given away. And I just remember, if I had to choose a job in this world, I could every day get great enjoyment from giving away $400,000. It was a wonderful feeling, and it was something that had been, I think it was a very good gesture on the part of the Theosophical Society as well. I'm very happy to talk to you tonight. The topic, as you have been told, is A Path to Beauty. Before trying to go into this subject, I think it would be well and probably honest for me to issue something of a disclaimer. Disclaimer being that due to the vastness of the subject, beauty like truth being one of those things that is inexhaustible and ever present, I can guarantee that this talk tonight necessarily will be inadequate. An inadequate talk about an inexpressible subject. That's my disclaimer. So now, probably I think the approach that would work best, at least for me, is if we were to look at it less as something that is going to explain something to you or define something to you. Rather, we could look at it as if we're just going to take a walk together. And much like taking a walk in Adyar, where you have these forested areas with temples situated within those forests, we'll take a walk around this subject of beauty. And perhaps during the course of this, we will be able to get some glimpse of the beautiful. And if so, then we've done what we can do for this evening. In 1880, 1 year after the Theosophical Society had moved its premises to Adyar, had moved its premises to India, had not yet come to Adyar, the founders, Colonel Olcott and H.P. Blavatsky, made a visit. Actually, Colonel Olcott went to visit with the Maharaja of Benares. Shortly after that, H.P. Blavatsky joined him there. And during their stay, they became acquainted with the family motto of the Maharaja, Satyam Nasti Paro Dharma, which of course we have translated as there is no religion higher than Dharma. There is no religion higher, there is no religion higher than truth. So there is no Dharma higher than truth. We take the religious aspect. Very shortly after that visit and that becoming acquainted with that particular motto, the founders made this the motto of the Theosophical Society, that there is no religion higher than truth. And since that time, since that moment, we have been very keenly focused on truth and the search for truth. And if we're honest about it, it's the search really that occupies the better part of what it is we do, because truth itself has a habit of being somewhat elusive to it, has a habit of being veiled somehow. And so we have focused on truth. In our particular approach to this search for truth, necessarily, we have had to place a great deal of our attention on what we might call small t truths. Truths. And there are many of those. Probably within the range of the teachings of the of theosophy, as we know it, there are a few categories that we address. So some of those lesser truths that we have focused on have had to do with the multidimensional nature of the universe and of ourselves. In much of what we have seen along the way during this convention, we have been exposed to aspects of the 7 different dimensions of being that the Theosophical Society keenly focuses on. So that multidimensionality has been one of the truths that has been pointed out to us. We have also focused on the fact that this is a universe in which intelligence is omnipresent. There is no place where there is not intelligence manifesting itself in the created universe. Whether we go from the mineral to the vegetable, to the animal, to the human, to the Devic, to the higher and more unseen kingdoms of nature, every aspect of it reveals a profound, interconnected intelligence. So that's been one of the truths that we have tended to focus upon. We've also focused upon our role within this universe within which we find ourselves situated. So one of the prime things that we become aware of is that we have a certain responsibility. That it's not something where we are just here idly passing through, although perhaps for a time that will be our approach to it. In the fundamental propositions of HPB, she talks about how initially what it is that spurs us on to growth is what she describes as natural impulse. We are being pushed, we are being impelled by nature. But a time comes, and that's the time that is the most important for anyone who finds the theosophical work meaningful, where choices have to be made. And in that process of choosing, self-induced and self-devised efforts are the focus. So self-responsibility and the various ways in which we can interact with the various processes that we find ourselves involved in. That's another one of these truths. There is the idea that every one of us is unfolding. Personally, there are a couple of ways that this can be described. There's the word evolution, and then there is the word unfoldment. Quite technically, evolution literally means unfoldment. But the idea that there is something, it's as if there's a photograph that's complete, that has a complete photo of you in your very best moment, that has been folded up time and time and time again and placed within a corner. And then as we unfold, this idea that there is something magnificent that can and ultimately will be revealed. This is also one of these truths. And all of them come within underneath the more broad heading, the one that more approaches actually big T truth of oneness, of the unity of all things. So these truths that we have been given, and these truths that we continually attempt to expose ourselves to, are truths that very much like a ladder, we can walk up step by step by step. As we move through this process, we start to become aware that these are not isolated facts, processes, that the interconnection and interdependence of all of these things starts to reveal to our inner eye a pattern. There is a pattern that is imprinted upon this universe at every level at which we encounter it. And the pattern is the same, but the more deeply we delve, the more elements of that pattern become apparent to us. So this pattern is something that describes the nature of the universe and the nature of our experience within it. And to those who have seen more deeply into this pattern, there would probably be a way that they could describe it. And probably the word for it would be beautiful. There is a profound beauty to the interconnections that exist. And it's everywhere. Confucius made the statement that beauty, everything has a beauty in it, but everyone cannot see it. And so this is the circumstance we find ourselves in. Everything from the exalted expressions of the great masters and teachers, very clear beauty that's in that, to the processes of decay, breakdown, even disease, has a beauty and a pattern that it operates within. And it's all part of this oneness that they have tried to get us to focus on. So this is where we'll go with this. I should say, too, that part of our focus on beauty within the Theosophical Society, we have spent much less energy in the appreciation or the search for beauty than we have in the search for truth. That's something that perhaps we can become aware of, we have a sense that that's true. But one of the things that happen nowadays, because I travel a good deal, it used to be in the old days, which is to say 6 to 10 years ago, in the old days, I used to always be loaded down with books in my suitcase. You know, the various things that I was consulting, the various things that I would be reading. Of course, nowadays, e-books are the thing. I have to admit that being from the old school of paper is king, I had some difficulty in adopting to e-books, a difficulty that lasted about a month, but now I find it's wonderful. Side point, but the point of it is this, that in my traveling library, I probably have 300 or 500 books that travel in something the thickness of your wallet. One of those is The Secret Doctrine, the full Secret Doctrine, of course. And what these e-books allow for is to search words and to see where a certain word appears. It's much like an automated index. So, just the other day, just out of interest, I typed in the word truth to see how many times it appeared in the Secret Doctrine. Probably you know, it appeared many, many times. But actually, just to inform you, if you're ever at a party and someone asks you the question, how many times is the word truth in the Secret Doctrine, it's 519 times. So, you know, there are probably about 1,500 pages, so every third page, truth comes up. Interesting little fact. Although, the next thing that I did was type in the word beauty. How many times does the word beauty appear in the Secret Doctrine? And probably we're all aware that it would be less than 519. But beauty in the 1,000+ pages of the Secret Doctrine appears a grand total of 38 times. 519, 38. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just an observation of our predominant focus. Voice of the silence. You know, I was on a roll once I started doing this. So voice of the silence. Truth, 27 times. It's a much smaller book. Beauty, 1. Shall we go to At the Feet of the Master? At the Feet of the Master, which is literally a pamphlet. Truth only appears 4 times. It's a very small book. And of course, beauty appears 0 times. So this is just a little factlet. But it's something that I think does indicate our predisposition within the Theosophical Society. We are predisposed to understand truth. And necessarily, the means to approach truth is through lesser truths. And so we do find ourselves sometimes becoming extremely absorbed in our point of view about the lesser truths that we have become acquainted with. So beauty. What is beauty? In a way, I kind of hoped I wouldn't have to answer that question directly. And of course, I can't answer the question. But what I can do is this. In the Western world, in terms of the religious background of the Western world, it tends to be much more of a Christianized atmosphere. So Europe, America, and any place where they have put their footprint tends to be more Christianized. And so, in terms of the approach to the wisdom traditions, the religious approach, the Bible and the books within the Bible are highly regarded. Within the Bible, there is one particular book. It's called Psalms. It's a funny word, Psalms. And there are 150 Psalms. Each one actually was initially intended as a song. So some of them are songs of praise to the divine. Some of them are songs of petition for aid in times of need. Various sorts of psalms that exist. But probably for anyone who came up in this Western environment, there is one particular psalm that every single person was exposed to, ultimately probably memorized. And it's the 23rd Psalm. So for those of you who haven't had that sort of exposure, it is a psalm of trust, a psalm of trust in the Lord, trust in the protecting influence of the divine. Beautiful. Many of these things are really just, they're poems because they were intended to be songs. So the 23rd Psalm says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." So the Lord is depicted as the one who takes care of the sheep. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me beside still waters. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He restores my soul. Then it goes on, and it talks about other aspects of the divine protection and trust. It says that, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." It says, "Your rod," that's to say the rod of the shepherd, and the staff of the shepherd, which tend to guide the sheep, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. My cup overflows. It's a beautiful psalm. And you anoint my head with oil. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. 23rd Psalm. And every little kid is exposed to that. Okay. I had many years ago, I had an occasion where I was at some sort of a fair. I don't even remember what it was. But there was a very well-known, quite renowned theatrical actor who was there. And for whatever reason, he was asked to recite the 23rd Psalm, which he did. And when he did, it was remarkable because his words were so perfectly formed. The way he projected the words could be heard throughout the room. His diction was flawless. And so it was quite an experience to hear this thing pronounced so well. And then for some reason, little old man was there. And it turns out this was an old man who had had many trials in his life, and he was a deeply devout Christian man. He came and he recited the 23rd Psalm. And in reciting it, his diction was not so good. His awareness of the proper pronunciation of the words wasn't excellent. But the sense of his unification and his profound trust in this divine shepherd was so profound, the entire room was silent. When this old man finished, some responded by crying, some responded by just shaking their head, and the only word they could say was beautiful. So to me, when we talk about beauty, I always carry this as something of the standard for a definition. It doesn't define in terms of words, but it does define in the sense that there is a presence, an ever-presence that is around us from moment to moment, that is accessible to us from moment to moment. And those times occur when we find ourselves standing in that presence, and it's not a matter of thought in those times. Clearly, nobody was thinking about shopping or about the many things we all had to do. We had been lifted to a doorway, and through that doorway shone beauty itself. So, this is the nature of the experience of beauty. Definition is secondary, but the experience is based on an omnipresence, and it's something that is not in any way separable from truth. With this recitation by this old man came a sense of power in this profound connection, came a sense of peace. I mean, very often in our consideration of matters related to the theosophical teachings, I think it's not just convenient, it's necessary that we have categories. And so, for instance, we have the categories of the paramitas, the perfections. In the theosophical worldview, we think in terms of 7 paramitas. So you have charity or generosity, perseverance, patience, all of the different perfections. And we tend to focus on them as if somehow they were isolated, the one from the other. But is it possible to have generosity and not have wisdom? Is it possible to be patient and not have perseverance? Is it possible to separate any of these from each other? But I think for the purposes of we as human beings, these sorts of categorization is necessary. As highly as we often think of ourselves, probably we have a long way to go. So similarly with beauty. So beauty in today's world is considered in many different ways, but probably we would all recognize that a good deal of what we regard as what is beautiful has been instilled in us through our own culture, our own families, etc. From the moment that the soul occupies a body, there is a process of imprinting cultural, family sorts of views onto that soul. So anyone who is born into a family gets the family religion, gets the family nationality, and so on. And along with it comes the perception of those things that are beautiful. And they don't necessarily transfer to other cultures. I mean, in the United States for the past several decades now, the sense of feminine beauty has involved extreme thinness. In other parts of the world, fuller sorts of bodies. For males in Korea these days, the perfect sort of whitened, flawless skin is a sign of the beauty of the moment. In other places, it looks odd. And all around the world, for whatever reasons, the various brown peoples of the world, there's always a huge industry of people trying to make themselves whiter. The world standard, largely projected in this particular time, tends to say that that's something that you really want for yourself. To people in the northern climates, they try to get a tan. So these standards of beauty are very, very flexible and really irrelevant to beauty. Not only irrelevant to beauty, but perhaps destructive of our tendency to actually access the beautiful. One of the things that Socrates said is that it is beauty that makes beautiful things beautiful. Beauty itself is what gives the look of beauty to those things that we perceive. Obviously, when we talk about beauty to the sense of the physical eye, we're talking about something that is fragmented. We're talking about something where we are looking at people, at places, and at things, and determining, according to our values, what is beautiful. In today's particular age, there is a field that is involved in the study of beauty, and it's called aesthetics. But because of the advances that have been made in neuroscience, you also have something called neuroaesthetics, which basically traces the brain's response and the nervous reaction to perception of beauty or the creation of works of art. And they find some remarkable things. One of the things that they're searching for is to see if there is, in fact, a material basis that can be charted for universal beauty. Probably they won't succeed very well with that, but they have found certain things. That there are, in fact, faces that are regarded as beautiful, that when looked at from cultures around the world, there's some agreement. There's a particular dimension to a face that has a universal appeal as beautiful. In the Western civilization, we have something that has been called the golden mean or the golden ratio or the divine proportion, which speaks about a proportion that defines beauty. And it's something that many people feel is universal and absolute, although even that doesn't carry across to all cultures. In Japan, drawing out of the Zen tradition, we have a philosophy of beauty that is called wabi-sabi, which I like that. I like that name, wabi-sabi. And basically, what it identifies as the beautiful requires things that are necessarily impermanent, incomplete, and imperfect. Actually, the flower design that we have on our convention program this year is drawn from that flower arrangement tradition of wabi-sabi. So items that are chipped through use, their impermanence creates a certain beauty that perhaps might not be there otherwise. So symmetry in that particular point of view is not the approach that they take. So beauty, it appears in many, many different ways. So how do we access the beautiful? Obviously, the most present and the most immediate access that is provided to us comes through our interaction with the natural world, with nature. It is an unfortunate thing that the natural world for many people is becoming more and more of a luxury. HPB in her time wrote an article talking about civilization as the death of beauty. So many people in today's world, in fact, the majority, find themselves living in urban settings. Urban settings which generally have not been planned with any thought toward uplifting and appealing nature. And so that's what people end up seeing. But there is something about the patterns in nature that are stabilizing always. And that's why we always find ourselves drawn to it. If you were to look for a definition of nature, the basic definition would be something like everything except humanity and its creations is nature. So the rhythms and the patterns that are available in the natural world are things that are subverted. They are irregular. within the human-created world. And we feel that. And it's becoming a growing influence in the world today. Additionally, from the theosophical point of view, we are aware that there are other levels of intelligence that associate themselves with nature and natural settings. The entire Devic kingdom lives and dwells in areas such as this, which make it very suitable for the encounter with beauty. In the records of mystical experience, those who have had these experiences that link them, they feel a union with the divine. Probably most of those experiences have occurred in nature in some way or other. So nature is one of those ways that we certainly root ourselves in the experience of beauty. In the mystical traditions of the world, just as truth tends to be the focus for the theosophical approach, love and beauty tend to be the approach for the mystic. So the desire to become unified with the all-beautiful, divine, is the goal of the mystic. And in that process, we have had many great people throughout history who have had that actual experience of union, who go on to become great healers, great teachers for the rest of us. There's a lovely book, very small book, written, I think, in the 13th or 14th century, Christian mysticism. And in that book, it's called The Cloud of Unknowing. It's a beautiful book. And in that book, the monk who was writing it as a guidebook to the approach to the mystical union with the divine, he talks about two different phases of this process. He talks about through love, one directs themselves toward the divine. So, in his words, by love, God may be gotten and held, but by thoughts, never. So by love, one can approach the divine, but by thoughts, there's a certain limitation on their elevation. Obviously, we know this from our theosophical points of view. When it comes to our meditation practices, we meditate. In many ways, the same sorts of experiences fall our way, but generally, for those of us who are engaged in meditation, most mornings or most times that we sit, it tends to be more something like meditation practice, which is to say we are practicing, but not really meditating. I always find myself sharing what I found to be the best definition of meditation. What is meditation? The definition was given by Lama Anagarika Govinda, who was a Dutchman. Surprising the way this works. Or no, I think he was from Germany. I take it back. He was a German, and he was also a Lama in the Tibetan tradition. But when asked what meditation is, his response was, meditation is not what you think. I always like that. So as long as we are involved in the processes of thought, we are not meditating. At those points when we pop above the waters of our thinking nature and its constant activity, at those points is when we are actually meditating. Thoughts don't go away. There's always a thought medium that will continue to exist, but we become disengaged from it. So by love, he may be gotten and held, but by thought, never. So in this process, what he describes is the cloud of unknowing that we enter into. And it's a cloud that hides from us the presence of the divine that we seek, but we know that from our love that we are within the realm, we are within the presence of it. And in order to actually have the experience of the divine, he says there's a second cloud that we must generate for ourselves, the cloud of forgetting. So this cloud of forgetting is the cloud of withdrawing ourselves again from the involvement in our various thoughts, desires, friendships, deeds that we have to do. And in that in-between space is where we encounter the divine, is where we encounter beauty, is where all of it exists. So there have been great people who have worked along this line, and I think it's something that can be made much more practical. The Cloud of Unknowing is a handbook for mystics. Perhaps all of us are not drawn in that direction, but still, everyone desires beauty in their lives. A great man, he was a great inventor by the name of Buckminster Fuller. He was a fellow who did a lot of, he was always thinking of something on the cutting edge. But he made the comment that when I am working on a problem, I never think about beauty. Never. But he says, when I have arrived at a solution, if it is not beautiful, it's wrong. That beauty must be a part of anything that is necessarily true. They're not separable. During World War II, in Vienna, Austria, there was a man who was a psychologist. He and his family, he was a Jewish psychologist, so he and his family were taken away to the, separated and taken away to the concentration camps. He never again saw his family, and during the 4 years that he was in these prison camps, he was shifted to 3 or 4 different ones. He ended up living through it. And he wrote a book. And it's a book that has been described as one of the greatest books of the 20th century. It's a book called Man's Search for Meaning. Man's name was Viktor Frankl. But he says a lot of things. He was a psychologist, perhaps a psychiatrist, and he developed an approach to psychology which was called logotherapy. It became really the third wave in psychology after Freud and Carl Jung. Logotherapy. But the basis for everything that he said was that every human being requires a sense of meaning in their lives. And we get that meaning from different things. We get it from the work that we do. That's one of the more common ways, the work that we do, the way we interact with family, those sorts of things. We get it from our sense of place. To many people, there are places on this earth that give them meaning. Their ancestral homes, things like this. So we get meaning from place as well. But in the situation that he found himself, which is to say uprooted from his life and practice in Vienna, placed into a concentration camp where everything about it was brutalizing and demeaning, and where the range of choices that were available to him were taken away. He could not choose when to get up in the morning. He could not choose what to eat. He could not choose who he was going to see, what profession he would pursue. And so he said that there's a third category that gives meaning, and that is the will to choose, which never disappears. That in whatever circumstance we find ourselves, we still have the capacity to choose inwardly. He gives examples of how that carried him through his time in the concentration camp. And one of the main things that carried him through was his ability to choose to see beauty. He comments how on one particular day he was eating his soup. And obviously the soup that was served was not particularly nourishing. They tended to describe it as dirty water. But looking in the bowl of soup, he said there was a fish head floating in this dirty water. And he said how he contemplated that fish head and the beauty of the scales, of the way the eyes reflected, of the shimmering nature of the skin, was something that just was, it struck him as profound. He makes the comment that it was as a prisoner in a concentration camp that the beauty of art and nature struck him as never before. So there are choices that we can make. Probably Mahatma Gandhi wrote something of an autobiography, and he described it, the title was My Experiments with Truth. I like that title very much, because I think it talks about what it is that we, each and every one of us, when we are sincere, we are experimenting with truth. In my own experience, I came to the Theosophical Society in Chicago. And I came to the Theosophical Society there because I met a person, a theosophist, but a person who was very much alive with this theosophy and very much able to also speak to a younger generation. I was 19 at the time. But there were a group of us who found our way to this place in Chicago, and we didn't know that's what we were doing, but we started a theosophical community. And in many ways, looking back on it, this is many years ago, obviously. If I was 19 or 20 years old, you know it was a long time ago. But looking back on that experience, in many ways it was an experiment, not just with truth, but an experiment with beauty. Because we found ourselves, this little group, in a neighborhood in Chicago that had once been relatively grand, but had greatly declined. And so the people that were in that area were people who had, many of them were from dysfunctional families. Many buildings had been abandoned. Vacant lots existed. And so you find yourself in this situation. We're here to study theosophy. But also we had the advantage of youth and the sort of boundless energy that comes with that. And so one of the things that we took to doing, first of all, we pooled our little money and bought the building next door, which was in bad shape. And the very first thing that we did was we started to beautify. Where there had been no grass, we planted grass. Where a flower had not bloomed in years, we planted flower gardens. Then we started to take vacant lots and we dug them up to make organic gardens on these vacant properties that had been completely discarded and just used for rubbish. We started to grow vegetables. Along with this, a lot of the younger people in the neighborhood started to notice this activity and started to want to be a part of it. So they wanted to come by and learn something about what is this theosophy thing. So we would work in the day, and in the night we would have these classes with these younger people on theosophy. Any place we could find something, we took it upon ourselves to beautify. And in that process of beautification, many lives were affected. Young people at that particular neighborhood, at that particular time, there was a great deal of addiction problems. Necessarily, there was all the sorts of depressions that come from impossible ability to envision a future. So those sorts of things. But the practicality of it was that for many of these people, they would come to want to talk about depression and what can they do. And we would put a shovel in their hand and say, come with us. We're going to dig up this garden. It's surprising how a hard day's work, you forget about depression. All you're looking to do is sleep. But many people were affected by that, and many people went on to actually have dramatic changes in their circumstances. And it was all really as a result of the emphasis on beauty. Beauty is attractive. Beauty is powerful. Beauty is a need, just like food, shelter, love are needs. And so I think very often when we try to think about how and what we can do in our theosophical work in this world, sometimes I think we limit ourselves unnecessarily. Very often we feel as if clothing these truths in words and passing those words on to someone else is the thing that will do it for them. And that has value, of course. But the number of ways that we can impact this world are as limited as the number of things we are capable of doing. I very much liked something that was said by Dr. Tepfer when he talked about, at the end of his talk, when he was talking about Gandhi and theosophy. One of the things he said was that all over the world today, there are these small, he described as eco-communities. But without knowing it, we were one of those communities there in Chicago, a group that was trying to ground a way of living in this world, a magnetic center that attracted, that empowered. It's the possibility for everyone, but all over the world today, you have these things. You have these centers. Quite honestly, I believe that if in our theosophical centers, if we do not have some focus on beauty, then perhaps we also limit our focus on truth. It's very easy to reflect the beautiful, to call people's attention to something beautiful that points to the beauty that is behind it. And in the world today, one of the descriptions that we find used so much is about the ugliness of the world scene. So many things that are harmful, that are non-life affirming. And oftentimes I do believe that many of us feel ourselves powerless in the face of these sorts of things. What can I do? I'm just one small person. But there is not a person among us who cannot make a beginning, who cannot choose to reflect meaning in our surroundings, to reflect meaning in the thoughts that we allow to course through our minds. We have choices in those matters as well. And so I think going ahead, there is a path to the beautiful that is right before us, right within us. But it only becomes real as we exert the necessary efforts to bring it forward, to make it known, to bring it into the world. So I think I told you that I would treat you to an inadequate talk about an inexpressible subject. One thing you cannot say is that I'm not honest. So I wanted to just thank you for your attention and encourage you to beautify your lives, to beautify this world. We have the capacity, and certainly it's a need. So, as always, thank you.
We have just heard about the great significance of beauty, how fundamentally important it really is in our lives. And I liked the phrase, a presence from moment to moment. That, in a sense, is where beauty lies, not in the future, not in the past, but in this very moment. On behalf of all here present and all who are listening elsewhere too, I would like to thank most sincerely International President Tim Boyd for a very fine and inspiring talk this evening. Thank you so much. This session is now closed.